Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Oppo Files, American Bridges podcast, talking about all things Oppo and all things the midterm elections. My name is Alexandra DeLuca. I'm the Director of Gubernatorial and State Communications here at American Bridge, and I'm joined by my fantastic colleagues, Pat Dennis, who's our VP of Research, and Shasta Molinex, who's our Deputy Director of Tracking. Welcome, guys.
Hey.
So today, before we talk about Michigan, which is our big state, we're going to be covering the gubernatorial race, which is Tudor Dixon. We'll be covering Kistina Karamo, who's running for Secretary of State, and also my nightmares. And then also, we're going to be talking about Matt DePerno, who's running for Attorney General. But before we get to all of that, like it has been for a number of months, the issue of abortion and abortion rights is at the top of many people's minds, especially this week following some pretty groundbreaking news out of Georgia. So guys, what do we think?
In terms of Georgia, I've heard everyone that I know, even from the political realm to non-political realm, talking about Georgia. So this is not something that is like particularly specific to us or even just people we work with. Everyone in the nation seems to be talking about this and the effect that it has. Though that's not a state that I cover, it still very much affects my candidates in the states that I cover and their rhetoric and almost the feeling of how much they think they can get away with, which I think has been really interesting.
Yeah, and let's just talk about Michigan really quickly. Michigan's dormant 1931 abortion law would threaten abortion providers with felony charges. And abortion providers are doctors, nurses, other medical professionals. It's incredibly draconian. Luckily, Gretchen Whitmer, the current governor of Michigan, has been really fighting hard to protect Michiganders' access to reproductive health care. Should someone like Tudor Dixon win in November, she could have the power to really drive the legislature to be passing restrictive anti-abortion legislation should the constitutional amendment on the ballot this November not go through. And I'm sure we'll get to talking about all of that, but I just think it's another really important example of why it's so important to elect Democratic governors. So we have seen Democratic governors all across the country, from Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan to Laura Kelly in Kansas to someone like J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, who are standing up and, you know, in some of these more purple and red states, really defending the line, holding that line for abortion rights. And then in somewhere like Illinois, where you have a governor who's leading the charge of making sure that Illinois can be a state where people who are fleeing from, anti-abortion politicians and legislatures and where their laws are really impacting their ability to get care, they're able to come to states like Illinois and make sure that they have the life-saving care that they need.
Well, on the federal level, we have Lindsey Graham, who wants a national level abortion ban, which really flies in the face of everything Republicans tried to say when they were scrambling after the Supreme Court decision came down, that it should be a state issue. It just really shows how much the party is extreme on this issue, how they cannot moderate on it, and how they want to be making federal legislation take away rights across the board, not just in states that their party controls.
Yeah, isn't it crazy that when the Dobbs decision came down, it basically said that, oh, this is going to be a statewide decision, this is a state decision, and then Lindsey Graham gets up on his soapbox and just a month or so after this decision decides he's going to have a federal abortion ban. That's a crazy priorities for them.
It's what they believe, and you have to give them credit for at least, a few of them being honest about it. But this is the sentiment that drives the party.
Speaking of federal candidates, let's talk about our favorite, or at least favorite, football star running in Georgia, Herschel Walker, who was caught in a bunch of explosive reporting last week. It was revealed that he had once paid for a abortion by an ex-girlfriend and had asked, and there's additional reporting that shows that he might have asked that woman to have another abortion. Obviously, Herschel has not had, there's been secret kids that have come out from Herschel. Not exactly representative of the family values he says that he espouses. And of course, this is a guy who supports both state laws in Georgia being restricted around abortion and a federal abortion ban.
I think what's really important here is the difference. You wanted to say hypocrisy, but really it's one set of rules that these folks have in their personal life and one set of rules that they want to legislate for everybody else. Hypocrisy really isn't strong enough of a word. Republicans don't believe their rhetoric on abortion. They believe that it isn't an issue that motivates their base. And honestly, Herschel Walker and his family decisions, ultimately, those should be between this woman and her doctor. I don't think Herschel Walker should be involved in a personal capacity or in the legislative capacity that he's going for.
Yeah, you're right that hypocrisy is not strong enough a word, but I also don't think Herschel Walker is the only Republican to have probably paid for an abortion. I think there are dozens of them.
Allegedly.
So just from watching the news and listening to podcasts, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing, it's been really interesting to hear the host just say that it's not true. And not that that's super surprising from conservative radio show hosts or podcast hosts, but the fact that they are just completely turning a blind eye to this is really interesting. And like Alex said, this is definitely not the first person who's done this, but this is one of the people who's been caught recently. And I think the fact that the right wing is just like shutting this down so vehemently is something that we have to look out for in every state with candidates like him.
Yeah, it really is a bisection in what truth is and is considered by different parts of the electorate. And Republicans believe that because Donald Trump is who he is, that he can deny reality, that he can sort of float above reality. Whatever he says is true. And Republican candidates think that applies to them as well. I don't think it does. I don't think a person like Herschel Walker is at all believable when he is not able to address the facts of this issue in the slightest. And but it really just shows Trump is guiding this party in terms of their policy on everything from democracy to choice, but also their attitude in just utter contempt for the concept of truth and accountability.
Well, and morals as well.
Yeah.
Morality in the Republican Party, not exactly in simpatico. All right, enough Senate talk. There's not a real Senate race in Michigan this year, so let's move on and talk about down ballot candidates. So the first candidate we need to talk about is Matt DePerno, who's running for Attorney General. He is a character. He is vehemently pro-Trump, anti-democracy, is running on a platform where he says he would prosecute doctors who perform abortions. And he's also said some pretty insane stuff when it comes around access to birth control.
What about like Plan B and all those sorts of things?
What's Plan B?
The morning after pill.
Oh.
I know my aunt's really worked up about that. I'm like, can you ban it? Is that like...
Well, it's an issue. In terms of how do you enforce it?
Can you take it out of stores? I don't know the right answer.
You got to figure out how you ban the pill from the state.
Sure. Can you do that through going up to courts?
Well, how do you stop it from coming in? That's the question.
Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I do, but you have to stop it at the border.
Okay.
It'd be no different than like fentanyl.
So you think it'd be a federal issue, not a state issue?
No, it's a state issue. It'd be a state issue.
Okay.
The state has to ban it.
Okay.
And it should be banned. But it's just an issue of how do you enforce that? How do you make sure that it stops?
I think it is an extreme example of how these folks, one, are utterly ignorant of the things that they have these such strong opinions on. This is not a statement of a person who understands, what Plan B is. It is not fentanyl for anybody on the fence on this issue. It is an extremely, important part of reproductive health care. And look, these folks feel entitled to pop off on these issues. They're completely ignorant. They will legislate around it. They have shown they will, enforce their mistaken views on these issues. And it's, honestly dangerous to people's actual health.
This is a person who doesn't understand it, like Pat said. And it's almost like he took it between the 1 or the 0. And he said, oh, this is a 1. I can't be for it. So therefore I have to be a 0. And it's just not that way. He took a totally interesting stance of just not knowing, hearing it from someone asking him a question, and then just basing his opinion just on that conversation alone, which is not how you should ever make decisions, especially as AG. You shouldn't just have a conversation with someone and then decide something is wrong. You need to know your facts, and the fact that he didn't do that says a lot about him as a candidate in general.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Pat's earlier point about these Republican candidates just boldly lying because Donald Trump has said it's okay for them to lie. I mean, there's lying about things you know about, and he could honestly have just said, I'm going to have to look into that. But they're so audacious.
And very typical Republican stance of, I'm going to talk about something I don't know about, so I'm going to turn it into a border issue. Which is just like, yeah, obviously people are going to love that. So that's exactly what he did, which is so frustrating to hear. But, good we know that we can hear his stance on this.
Yeah, if we're gonna fix the roads, we got to stop the potholes at the border.
Yeah, exactly.
Ban pothole importation. Let's move on and talk about election denialism and Matt DePerno. So he's been endorsed by Donald Trump, of course. Trump specifically said he endorsed DePerno so that the election would not be stolen from Republicans in 2024. It wasn't stolen, but that's, we can say that as many times as we want. Let's listen to the clip.
And this choice is not just about 2022. This is about ensuring the state of Michigan cannot be stolen from Republicans in 2024 or ever again. Matt will stop it. Tom will not.
No shock there. They're preemptively announcing that they will be rigging the 2024 election should Matt DePerno win.
Right. And Matt DePerno, unlike other Trump-endorsed candidates, after he won his nomination, didn't scrub Trump from his campaign page at all, which is like, if you click on it, he and Trump are the number one picture. He is really, really focusing heavily on Trump so he can appeal to his base, which is not surprising, but it is interesting that other candidates completely scrub Trump and then he still has him front and center on his page.
He also raised $400,000 through an election fraud defense fund, and it's kind of unclear where all of that money ended up going. So yeah, that's Matt DePerno running for Attorney General of Michigan. He's a bad guy who will do bad things for the people of Michigan. And speaking of bad people who would do bad things for the people of Michigan, time to talk about Kristina Karamo. This woman is interesting. So first and foremost, she is part of a coalition of Republican Secretary of State candidates, all endorsed by Donald Trump, who have explicitly said that their role is not to defend the vote of people in their states, but to restrict it and to rig these elections and to do anything possible in order to make sure Donald Trump wins in 2024 and Republicans win up and down the ballot for years to come.
The candidate quality across the Republican Party it's a storyline that is not good this year. It's just extremely dangerous. This is such an important position for administering elections in an extremely important state, and it comes with real power. You're really making decisions about how a election is run, about where to put resources, about everything. And if you're not plugged into reality, you just literally do not have the decision-making capacity to run these elections in the way that our democracy requires.
Well, that's because Kistina Karamo, as we'll see later, focuses more on talking about demon sex than about actually executing electoral elections in her state.
It is almost like she runs as a Facebook candidate. Like, she knows the more the crazier statements she has, the more people are going to watch it. And I feel like that's how she has gained a lot of her popularity, is through her podcast, like It's Solid Food, where she just talks about some of the craziest ideas that are even out there. So just watching her from the beginning to now, I'm amazed at some of the things that she has said. And again, some of the topics she talks about are extreme. And I think it's because she knows that the more extreme she is, the more listeners she'll get, because people are like, oh, have you listened to this lady? Like, what, she's talking about this, but I'm not even sure that they agree with her. I think that they are, in an instance, like kind of just watching because it's so outrageous. So her support has been interesting.
It's like if Logan Paul ran. It's like,
yes.
I don't know, the craziest YouTuber you can think of.
Yeah.
Andrew Tate running for Michigan Secretary of State.
It's the incentives the Republicans have created on their candidate recruitment. Is they have created this media echo chamber that creates personalities that get attention for doing the worst, least realistic, least appealing, most extreme statements that in an age of social media will, game the algorithm into causing, getting upranked. And these folks gain real power within the Republican Party, and it's dangerous for, the entire country.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a look at some of her more Again, any 30 seconds of her podcast is the craziest thing you've ever heard. But let's take a couple of examples. All right. Let's hear her talking about abortion.
That's the slippery slope that people need to understand is taking place with this whole issue of abortion. Not only is it anti-Christ and it's inhumane, it's murderous, but it's going to keep on going. There's no end in sight for it.
It's wicked. It's the most wicked thing ever. It's far more wicked than slavery. And David, the reason why I say it's far more wicked than slavery, because you and I are evidence that many slaves survived. Aborted children don't survive, because that's the whole premise, is to kill them. And so when we enter to a point in society that murdering other people is permissible to make my life better, then that's a human sacrifice. And so my opponent, they're like, Kristina called abortion human sacrifice. It is.
Yeah, it's bad. That's Kristina. She talks about possession and human sacrifice. So many conspiracy theories float around in that woman's head. It's dangerous.
And she's even gone as far to say that premarital sex leads to bestiality. I'm not sure why she thinks that's true or why she has that stance, but I think it's just that she wants really strong words, like strong nouns, to back things up. And sometimes it feels like she just picks them out of some dictionary and just places them in there, and it just doesn't make sense. So yeah, watching her and listening to her can sometimes just be like this word salad of.
It's like a Mad Lib. It's like
Webster's Dictionary of YouTube thumbnail quotes.
Yeah, honestly, she is at times kind of robotic. And I think comes out with these just to rile people up.
I think we've got a clip of her talking about demons. It's Halloween season, so we have to throw this one in here.
Demonic possession is real. How people become possessed, I don't know all the details of it. But having intimate relationships with people who are demonically possessed or oppressed, I strongly believe that a person opens themselves up to possession.
What happens when she thinks that, employees within the bureaucracy she's in charge of running are demonically possessed?
I don't know if that breaks some sort of workplace harassment violation to get fired. I think you probably have just cause to sue the state of Michigan if you get fired for allegedly being demonically possessed.
It's a good question. We should run it by our lawyers.
Yeah, we should ask HR. And then, of course, as I'm sure is surprising to no one, she's incredibly, incredibly homophobic. She said that if LGBTQ don't convert back to being straight, that still being friends with them is like watching them about to get hit by a train, presumably because they're going to hell and they have demonic possession or whatever. It's just really cruel ways to talk about a large group of Michiganders and a large group of Americans. It's really, it's just sad.
And I think we're seeing her try to push rhetoric further and further to see how far she can go and what she can get away with, which, it's painful to have to listen to her say those things, especially when she's saying them regularly or very early in on her podcast, It's Solid Food. She talks about this kind of stuff a lot, but you can see from the very beginning to the end of that, she starts getting more and more extreme. So there must have been some kind of, like we've talked about, that Facebook algorithm, you're just getting feedback. And it's almost like the Facebook like the more attention you get, the more extreme you're going to take it. And she just hasn't stopped.
And I feel for, young queer kids in Michigan in particular who one of their elected leaders could be a woman who talks like this about them. And life is already hard enough for these kids, especially with Republicans nationally pushing horribly anti-LGBTQ proposals up and down the board. And to just see a person in a position of leadership talk like this about kids and about young people and about any number of people, marginalized communities, it's really pathetic and embarrassing. Now it's time to bring in our polling expert, Ian Smith, to talk about polling we're seeing on the ground in Michigan. So Ian, you want to talk to us a little bit about what the polling is looking like on the ground in Michigan?
Yes, sure can do. So Michigan polling is having Gretchen Whitmer up 53 to 47 against Tudor Dixon. Now that is a lead that is showing signs of shrinking over time. Gretchen Whitmer's lead was as high as 18 points in some kind of out there polls, but it shows you how popular Gretchen is in the state. With that being said, as we've said with all of these elections, it's going to get tighter going into Election Day as the Republican base rallies, as economic woes continue to reverberate through Election Day. We're going to look to see that number tighten up, especially as Republicans start to spend that money in the state. Tudor Dixon is pretty unpopular. Obviously, refrain that we've been talking about here are the Republican candidates' views on abortion. YouGov and CBS actually asked a interesting question. So on Michigan Proposal 3, which would amend the state constitution in Michigan to establish the right to abortion, 54%, very close to Gretchen Whitmer's polling number currently, said that they would say yes to adopt the proposal, compared to 38% who would vote no. Again, showing you just how close those numbers are, right? 53 for Gretchen Whitmer, 54 for this proposal. Voters are galvanized behind it, right? With that being said, you also have on the flip side, 52% of voters in the state who believe that Joe Biden's presidency has hurt the Michigan economy. So we're going to be playing that battle at the polling booth to see which message gets across there.
Ian, do you think that there's any chance, like we saw in Kansas, the polling was pretty limited around the constitutional amendment in the lead up to the vote earlier this summer? Do you think there's a potential for this constitutional amendment to really drive Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents and even some Republicans to the polls and hopefully bring them in for Governor Whitmer?
I really do think so. Again, we've been seeing the narrative build, and it's true that in most states, Democrats, right, have been galvanized by the Roe decision and the Dobbs decision, and it's kind of fired them up. But this is one of the only states where we actually have a constitutional amendment on the line, and traditionally Republicans have turned out for that, right? That's how we've gotten to where we are now. So without the historical data on these ballot initiatives, I'm really excited to see how it turns out. Speaking of how tight the race is, there was actually an article released Sunday the 9th by The Hill speaking to that, right, how over time this Gretchen Whitmer, Tudor Dixon race is getting closer and closer. So we definitely can't rest on our laurels and create a 2020 situation all over again where we're surprised by the result.
Absolutely not. We're going to run through the tape. Thank you so much, Ian, for this edition of Ian's Polling Corner. As always, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Now it's time to talk about the marquee race in Michigan, Tudor Dixon, and the gubernatorial race. So first and foremost, Tudor Dixon is the Republican nominee. She is the Republican nominee in large part because Betsy DeVos, of former Trump Secretary of Education fame, contributed more than $4 million to outside groups during the primary that were either supporting Tudor Dixon or blasting the current governor, Gretchen Whitmer. Pat, talk more about that.
So Betsy DeVos, if you're not familiar with her, as you mentioned, former Trump Secretary of Education. She's a sort of a long-time conservative activist who's really focused on what I would characterize as defunding public schools. Whatever policy moves funding out of public schools and sort of, this resource that is available to all and into private schools, into private charter schools, voucher programs. It's really, an ideological commitment to moving away from the public school system into a sort of less accountable private school system. And she's a billionaire. She has these opinions, and she has a lot of ability to write checks to get these opinions out there. Even if they're not in the best interests of children and parents, there are a lot of folks who see those checks and are extremely happy to support these issues and to do the work of an activist like Betsy DeVos. So she worked in the Trump administration for a long time, but is ultimately on the state level a funder of candidates.
And it's not just that Tudor Dixon and Betsy DeVos want to, defund public schools and give them to private schools. Private schools are also religious schools. They're schools that allow administrations and teachers to legally discriminate against their students if they're LGBTQ, if they're disabled, if they have other learning disabilities. And it really threatens Michigan's existing school system. Because she's a Republican candidate running in the year 2022, Tudor Dixon is also vehemently anti-abortion. We talked previously about Michigan's existing voter laws and kind of what's at stake, but I think it's important that we hear directly from Tudor Dixon herself. So she previously said that having a baby could be healing for teenage rape victims.
I've been very clear about my position. I do not approve of, I'm pro-life with exceptions for life of the mother. I've talked to those people who were the child of a rape victim, and the bond that those two people made, and the fact that out of that tragedy, there was healing through that baby. It's something that we don't think about because we assume that that story is someone who was taken from the front yard, then returned.
What is she even talking about?
Just absolutely outrageous that she would say that. And I'm not sure who or how she came to that conclusion or even what brought her to actually say that publicly. It's like she went on autopilot and was like, oh no, what do I say? And then just said that, like, without thinking at all. Though the problem is when you talk without thinking, that is honestly what you think.
I mean, it's like the old line, right? A gaffe is when a politician tells the truth. She said what she believed there, and I think we should take her word for it.
Well, she said what she believed, and she also lied. She says she supports abortion in the case of life of the mother, and that's not true. She has said previously on the record, and gets very mad when American Bridge talks about it, but she said previously that she's pro-life candidate with no exceptions, including for the health of the mother. So I'm calling BS on that one. I also believe at the end of that clip, she claims that most rape victims are pulled out of their front yards or something. Whatever she was talking about at the end was, again, she's on autopilot, like Shasta said, like it's not supposed to make sense.
And one thing to summarize that and the education piece is we can't deny that she seems like she's getting a lot of talking points from Glenn Youngkin's campaign, especially in education and his stance on abortion. And it's almost like she's looking at him saying like, well, it worked for him, it'll work for me. Like, you can't just throw a vest on and call it a day. It's 2022. It's not 2021 anymore.
Didn't thousands of students just leave Virginia schools in protest of Glenn Youngkin's policies 2 weeks ago?
And she's like, it can't be denied that she is like taking his policies and ideas, talking about them. I mean, he came to campaign for her.
I'm glad we took a detour into bashing Glenn Youngkin because nobody deserves it more. Ultimately, spreading these talking points is hurting his party. It's hurting himself.
So let's take a look at the video that American Bridge did on her abortion flip-flop because, again, it makes her so mad when we post it. So here you go. Hi, Tudor.
I am a pro-life candidate, no exceptions.
No exceptions for rape and incest, or what about health of the mother?
No exceptions.
I'm very pro-life, but I do have exceptions for life of the mother.
There we go. So Tudor, you're lying every time you say you believe in that exception because you're only saying that now because we called you out on it. You know what else she also lies about is about being pro-Michigan worker. She is constantly talking about the fact that Gretchen Whitmer is taking jobs from Michigan when the opposite is true. Gretchen Whitmer has brought in a ton of jobs into the state, and Michiganders are really excited to be making things in Michigan again. And she also said that she wants to protect Michigan jobs, but her company exclusively sold materials imported from European countries. So she is not practicing what she preaches when it comes to one of the most important things for anyone running statewide in Michigan, and that's talking about jobs.
Really goes to show, how much of this populist rhetoric from Republicans is, utterly opportunistic. This, importing products to sell in the United States, there's not a crime. There's nothing, it is just merely against, everything they talk about in terms of, supporting American manufacturing, reshoring, things that are ultimately very important for the United States and do not factor into the business decisions of her or many other Republicans.
Yeah, and she knows that it's an important topic. Almost every single radio interview we have of her, she brings it up in some fashion. And it's always that she's spewing lies about Whitmer every single time she has to talk about it. And it's almost like the more she talks about it, the more you can tell she's lying, which has been really interesting. And just the, radio show host, as they will, egg this on. And she, kind of like the whole Facebook rhetoric thing, it's getting traction for her, so she just keeps going and keeps going.
Well, this is a problem that these Republican candidates don't actually talk to real reporters. So no one's asking them real questions or following back up. They're just doing Bannon's War Room or local, Republican radio, national Republican radio, going on OANN and Fox News. They are not actually having dialogue with anyone who might be able to push back on the things that they're saying. So, for example, she called the President Biden's infrastructure plan that brought $7 billion into Michigan fake. Like, that, it's just not true. And no one she talks to is pushing back on things like that.
Yeah, it's what you get when you spend more time talking to Steve Bannon than talking to actual voters.
Mm-hmm.
Actual voters will call you out on that stuff.
Yeah, I think we've got a video here about her lying about Governor Whitmer's record.
What you're seeing in the state of Michigan is that you're seeing our legacy industry really leave the state.
Crest Marine, which is near Owasso in Shiawassee County, is adding more jobs. And Governor Whitmer was there today to announce the company's investment and growth.
She has not brought more jobs to the state.
The international company moving its North American headquarters, opening it in Kent County. It'll create more than 100 jobs and result in millions of dollars in investment.
We're not going to get the good businesses. We're not going to get the good careers.
The ribbon cutting for a new mid-Michigan semiconductor facility that's bringing dozens of good-paying jobs to the region.
And this is something that the governor hasn't been able to prevent.
Yeah, I mean, when you see it side by side, it's pretty obvious. She says one thing and reality is completely different.
It's extremely inconvenient for these Trumpist candidates that, all this money is coming in to boost the economy. Instead of, dealing with that, maybe doing some internal dealing with why they would oppose such a thing, they just act like it's not true.
And it's very interesting to watch her or listen to her talk about this in other states, because she uses three in particular: Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Two of those states have Democratic governors.
She doesn't know. She hears Kentucky and North Carolina and says, oh, must be run by... No, it's not that she just doesn't know. Finally, the last thing we should talk about, like we talked about with all these candidates, is the threat a Tudor Dixon governorship would have on elections both in Michigan and looking ahead to 2024. So Dixon, who is endorsed by Donald Trump, has claimed in multiple ways that the 2020 election was rigged against Trump. She, along with Karamo and DePerno, would be would just form a wall against democracy in Michigan, a critical state ahead of the 2024 presidential election. It's incredibly concerning to think what they could do, the ways that they could go against our democracy, and it's a really big existential threat for the state and for the country.
Yeah, I think it's really important for everyone to remember that Donald Trump tried to steal the 2020 election, and he was not successful, but he did everything he could.
Including storming the Capitol and trying to kill Mike Pence.
Yes. He did it once, he would do it again, and the reason he failed is because he did not have allies in key areas of power. And if he gets, people in these areas of power, they will do everything they can, just like in 2020, to do what their leader says. Donald Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He has exercised this power repeatedly. The reason the entire party is now at war with elections where either party is capable of winning, they deny that concept. If they do not win, they see it as a rigged election. And the reason is because of Donald Trump, and it is utterly dangerous, and it cannot be allowed. These people cannot have these positions of power. It's dangerous to America as a concept.
That brings us to the end of our Michigan episode of the Oppo Files. We hope you enjoyed, and tune in next week as we break down the Republican candidates running in Nevada this year. Be sure to subscribe to American Bridge on YouTube so you don't miss out on that and the future episodes of this podcast. And also, please make sure you're following American Bridge on your favorite social media sites if you're not doing already. All our accounts will be in the description below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
At American Bridge, we're holding Republicans accountable. Subscribe and join the fight.